Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this fantastic session that we are running tonight in partnership with My Rights, My Say for our talking point session. We are talking about children's rights and additional support needs and what families need to know. So we are just letting everyone in from the waiting room just now. So please come in and get settled. Welcome to everybody. You will find that your microphone is on mute because this is a webinar. If you do want to ask a question, then please use the chat. My name is Diane Delaney. I am the Training Associate here with Connect, and joining me this evening are some representatives from the organisation My Rights, My Say, and I will introduce them more formally in a moment. What would be really nice for them and for everyone else perhaps is if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, so perhaps just maybe saying your name and maybe which local authority your child goes to a school within, and any other additional information you might want to share at this point, that would be lovely. Welcome to everybody coming in. Thank you so much for joining us. You will see on this slide that we are recording this session this evening too. So this is for our members to have access to at a later point. That we upload all of our materials onto our digital platform called My Connect. I'll tell you a bit more about that shortly. Hello and thank you to people saying hello in the chat and introducing themselves. I'm just going to repeat a bit of what I've said there for the couple of people who have just come in. So my name is Diane Delaney. I am the Training Associate here at Connect. We are running this PowerPoint presentation for about an hour this evening. I have a couple of my colleagues here from Connect joining me the session, so you might see them saying hello in the chat and maybe answering a question if it's relevant. We will send out the PowerPoint presentation to you. If you check by tomorrow, you should have it, unless there's anything to add from or a question that comes tonight that we can put it all together for you. But you will receive the PowerPoint presentation, so you don't have to do screenshots or take any notes or anything like that. The presentation will run and then it'll be questions at the end, but you can put questions in the chat at any time, and myself and my colleagues will have a look out for that, and we will share those questions with My Rights, My Say at the end, and they will try to answer them. I suppose what we would say is what is helpful in these types of sessions, because there's a few people here, is if you are asking a question, maybe thinking about how you could ask the question in a way that might be a benefit for everyone to answer. I think if you have a very personalised, very specific question that's unique to perhaps your child, your school or yourself, then you might want to contact My Rights, My Say directly. And they have told me this evening that they are happy to take direct inquiries, and there's contact details on the PowerPoint where you can have that more kind of detailed, specific conversation and access to guidance and support. But otherwise, they will try their best to answer questions as at the end of the session. I've got this wee feedback form here, so ourselves here at Connect, and I'm sure My Rights, My Say would be really delighted to hear what your views and your thoughts and your experiences are of this session. So please do take a moment to scan the QR codes either today, tomorrow, or within the next few days, and give us some feedback. That will help us to know what else we can do to help and support you. And so before I hand over, I just want to give you a wee quick overview about Connect. I know there are a few people here this evening who are maybe just getting to know us for the first time. So we are the only charity and membership organisation for parent groups across Scotland. We have 28 out of 32 local authorities who are Connect members, and that means that their parent councils and the staff within those schools and the parents and carers within that schools have access to a number of benefits and support from us here at Connect. We're all about partnerships in education, supporting parents and families to be involved, engaged, and have their voices heard in all matters relating to education. And we do have a number of kind of types of support and information and resources that we offer to our members, but we do share information with non-members too, and you'll see some of that listed there on the PowerPoint. If you do want to know more about Connect membership, then there is an email address you can contact us. We would be happy to chat with you. Okay, now getting on to the best bit. So our talking points sessions, they really are an opportunity for parents and carers to hear about current issues and topics relevant to families, children and young people. We really are delighted to welcome members of My Rights, My Say to talk about children's rights under the Education Additional Support for Learning Scotland Act 2004. My Rights, My Say helps children aged between 12 to 15 years with additional support needs to use their needs and have a say, to use their rights, I should say, and have a say in decisions about their education. Iain Nisbet is here this evening. He is an education lawyer who specialises in helping families to secure the support that their children need in school. Niki is a service coordinator for Partners in Advocacy, and Marie Harrison is a service manager. So the plan is that Iain, Niki and Marie will deliver their presentation and then they'll take questions at the end. But as I said, feel free to share your thoughts or questions or comments at the moment that you think about it so you don't forget towards the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm sure you will all join me in welcoming My Rights, My Say this evening, and I'm now going to hand over to Marie. Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you so much, Diane, and hello everybody. Thank you so much for having us here today. We've been really excited to come and to talk a little bit to you about My Rights, My Say. My Rights, My Say is a little bit of a beast with many heads. Don't be put off. We'll sort of slowly and calmly talk you through who we are and what we do. I think the main thing to sort of take away is that we are here as a partnership between different organisations, and all of us are here to support children and young people with additional support needs, to have their views considered, to be listened to. A young person once told me that he wished adults that worked with him could just walk in his shoes just for one day. And basically what we're trying to do in different ways within My Rights, My Say is facilitate that for young people, support them, to explain to the adults that are there to help them what it feels like to be a young person with additional needs in Scotland in 2026, because none of us have tried that as adults. With all our experience, all our expertise, none of us know what our young people are going through today. And we are trying within My Rights, My Say to make sure that their views are passed on to the people who can make decisions that affect children's lives. Next slide, please. So today what we're hoping to do is we'll talk a little bit about My Rights, My Say. As I said, a little bit complex, so we'll try to take the complexity out of who we are and explain to you all what we're about. We'll talk to you about additional support needs and what this terminology mean. We'll talk a little bit about the different aspects of our partnership. So that's legal representation for children. It's a children's views service that can help in formal processes. Our Enquire advisory service, who can support parents and carers and professionals, and independent advocacy, which can support children and young people who need support to share their views. And then we'll just link a little bit to children's rights in Scotland in general, but we don't want to linger too much on that because we want to make sure we have time for questions. So another wonderful young person, one of our young advisors, gave us some advice and some feedback on how to run our training sessions. And this young person said, no matter what you do, don't be boring. We're going to do our absolute best today not to be boring. And this young person also said, make sure there are pictures. We've done everything. We've thrown every visual in the book after this presentation. And the young person said, bring presents if you can. We can't because this is an online session. So apologies in advance on behalf of ourselves that we couldn't bring presents, but we hope that the information we are here to share with you today will be useful. And please feel free to get in touch with us. Use the contact details that are embedded in the PowerPoint slides. Next slide, please. So I said My Rights, My Say is a beast with many heads. It's in short a beast with 5 heads. We have 4 partnership organisations, each with a specific area of expertise. And then we have our group of young advisors, who are the most tenacious and incredible group of young people with additional support needs. They keep us right. They're not afraid to tell us when we get something wrong. So this is how My Rights, My Say is set up. We have the young advisors. We have Partners in Advocacy. Niki is here on behalf of Partners in Advocacy today. MRMS, and Partners in Advocacy is our independent advocacy support service for children and young people. Then we can have Kieran Legal, who are here today with Iain Nisbet. He's sometimes sort of very, very affectionately referred to as our legal eagle, and he will tell you more about what it is he does a little bit later on. Enquire is one of our partnership organisations who can provide advice and information. And then there's Children in Scotland, that's, I suppose, me. And what we do in Children in Scotland is support children who have been asked to share their views in formal processes. So this is the makeup. So we are 4 organisations, a group of young people. We're all fully funded by Scottish Government. And that's why it can be a little bit confusing when you speak to someone from My Rights My Say. It could be anyone from any one of these organisations. Next slide, please. So I'm one of these fair and few people who quite like to talk about legislation. Iain might be the exception to that. I think, Iain, you're quite into it as well. I'll try not to linger too much on this, but it's important to sort of explain, I suppose, the legal context and where My Rights My Say sort of originated from. So in Scotland, there's an Education Act that came into force a long, long time ago, but in 2016, some significant changes was made to this particular piece of legislation, very specifically to what's referred to as the Additional Support for Learning Act. And the changes that were made were that some rights that had previously only belonged to parents and carers and young people 16 and over were extended to children aged 12 to 15. This included the right to make a referral, a reference to the Additional Support Needs Tribunal. It included the right to request specific support or request an assessment, and the right to have your views considered in different formal processes that affect you, and a lot more. We won't go into too much detail, but suffice to say that back in 2016, it was decided that children aged 12 to 15 with additional support needs should have the opportunity to take charge and to be more, I suppose, sort of in a position where they could exercise their own rights rather than rely on parents to do it on their behalf. Thankfully, at this point, some clever people also thought if we want children to exercise their rights, we need some kind of a framework around them to support them, to make sure this happens in a meaningful way, to make sure that children understand what this means and how this can affect their lives. And that was why My Rights My Say was concocted and is fully funded by Scottish Government. We came into existence in 2018, so a couple of years after the changes were made to the legislation. So that's our main sort of reason for existing, I suppose, it's these changes, and it's what happened back then in 2016, and we've been happily doing so ever since. But another important piece of legislation is the UNCRC Incorporation Act, or the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, which became embedded into Scottish law in 2024. There are a lot of really, really important articles in the UNCRC, specifically children having a right to be heard, to be listened to, and for their views to be given due weight. Children often tell us that adults are good at asking but not very good at listening, and that's one of the things the UNCRC Act is really there to cement, that we need to listen and act on children's views. But there are also other articles pertaining to children with disabilities and to children's right to an education, and for that education to be meaningful for them. And then the other piece of, I suppose, sort of popular policy that we refer to a lot is GERFIC, getting it right for every child. That is what we're trying to do within My Rights My Say, and we use getting it right for every child very practically in the way we engage with our children and young people. Next slide, please. And then I am going to hand you over to Iain Nisbet. Iain is going to talk to you a bit about additional support needs, what it means to us, and then talk more about his part of My Rights My Say, and then I will come back to you again later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. Yeah, so the first thing when we're talking about this is a service for children aged 12 to 15 who have additional support needs, we need to know who that is. So what does it mean to have additional support needs? So this on the slide there, that's what the legislation says, word for word. And you can see perhaps that is a very broad definition. It's deliberately intended to be broad, to be inclusive, and to be much wider than the term special educational needs, which went before it, which was really just looking mainly at children who had medical or disability related needs. And so you'll see some of the really key words within there starting on the third line, we're looking at children who have needs, who need additional support at school for whatever reason. And you couldn't really get much broader than that. So that definitely helps, I think, in terms of we don't have to worry too much about getting down into the nitty-gritty of, well, do you have a diagnosis, or where's your letter from your doctor, or things like this. If a child is struggling at school, if they need extra help at school, then they're covered by the service, and we can provide them with that assistance, which is great news. You'll have heard the statistics, perhaps. Just at the end of the year, Scottish Government does a survey of Scottish schools, and the latest statistics are that 43% of all Scottish pupils are formally recorded as having additional support needs. And actually, we know that some pupils who have additional support needs haven't been formally recorded, so the true figure is probably even a little bit higher than that. So this is a significant number of pupils that we are talking about, and the vast majority of those are in mainstream schools. They're not in special schools or in units or like. They're in mainstream schools, following probably a mainstream curriculum or a slightly differentiated version of that. So it really is covering a huge number of children and young people. We have the next slide up, please. So just sort of a statistic request here. Somebody in the chat, can we repeat the statistic? Yeah, so as of last year, the Scottish Government statistic is that 43% of all pupils in Scottish schools have additional support needs, or are formally recorded as having additional support needs. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about the part of the service that Cairn Legal provides. So Cairn Legal is a firm of solicitors, but that has always been about helping families with disabilities. A lot of the work that they do is around adults with incapacity, planning for the future, and that sort of thing. And so it's quite a good fit with my department, which is to do with education law. And the rights that Marie was talking about earlier on are quite wide-ranging, but they include, importantly, rights for individual children with additional support needs to take formal action where necessary to enforce their rights. And actually, that doesn't happen that often. Most cases are capable of being resolved through advocacy, through advice and information, and so on. But where a case has become a bit stuck, if there isn't an agreement that people can reach and it needs to move on to a formal dispute resolution process, that would be where myself and Cairn Legal would be involved. There's a couple of different types of dispute resolution within the Act. One of them is like a kind of formal complaints process called independent adjudication. And we've been involved just recently, actually, in terms of supporting and working alongside advocates to help children to bring that kind of complaint forward where they think that they're not getting the right kind of support. And then in relation to the tribunal, which is the other type of dispute resolution, almost all of the cases that we deal with, My Rights My Say, are to do with coordinated support plans, because that's a very specific right that has a route into the tribunal. And so that we find ourselves getting involved with that. A coordinated support plan is a statutory, a legal education plan that is for children who need additional support, not just from education, but also from other agencies, usually health or social work. And so that's the coordinated bit of the coordinated support plan. So that's what would be involved there. And by and large, we can split that into three categories of cases. So one would be where a child has asked for a coordinated support plan and has been told that they don't qualify, and we can get involved in that sort of case. Second type of case would be where there is a coordinated support plan in place, but the child doesn't think that the contents of the plan are correct, that there's been that it doesn't describe their needs properly, or it doesn't include the right kind of support or something like that. And then the third type of case is where the CSP is in place and the contents are fine, but it's not actually being delivered. It's not being put into practice in the way that it should be. And again, we can assist the child with taking that sort of case to the tribunal. Just very quickly talking you through what that looks like where there is an appeal. First of all, we have to find out if the child qualifies or not. So it's not every child who's 12 to 15 who has additional support needs. The law says that they need to have capacity. So they need to sort of understand what it is that they're doing and what the implications of exercising that right are. And there's a well-being test that applies as well. So we want to make sure that we're not taking any action that would end up inadvertently, being disadvantageous to the child or harming their well-being in some way. Having put a case together, there's special forms. The tribunal, we think, do a terrific job in terms of making their processes as child-friendly and as accessible as possible. So there's special forms that are specifically designed for 12 to 15-year-olds. So very often they'll take a large part of filling those forms out themselves, having some assistance perhaps from myself or from their advocate. And that's what starts the tribunal process off. There's then a case statement period where a bit more detail is added to the case, and we would start to see what the council's response is about the coordinated support plan. And there would then be a case management call where we would decide the rest of the procedure for the case. Throughout all of that, both ourselves at My Right My Say and also the tribunal really keen to make sure that the child's voice remains front and centre. And the child, depending on how they feel about it and what they want to do, can give their views to the tribunal, but also it's their case. They can give evidence to the tribunal as well if that's needed. And cases would tend to resolve. A lot of them actually don't need to go to a full hearing, and just bringing the case gives an opportunity to sort of have a proper sit down and think and discussion with the other side. We're often able to reach an agreement about whether there should be a plan or what the contents are, and so on. But some cases will require a full hearing, and the child in that case receives full legal representation throughout the process, just in the same way as if they were an adult party to a tribunal case. And we've even supported some children in taking further appeals, which go beyond the first tier tribunal to the upper tribunal for Scotland, and helping them to bring their cases to that level where actually it's High Court judges that are sitting and determining that. So we're able to support children and their cases even to that sort of level. Can we have the next slide, please? I think that's back over to someone else.
It is, Iain. Thank you so much. It is indeed back to myself. As Iain said, he is there to deal with situations where the child themselves is making an appeal. The Children's View Service is slightly different in that we react and come into play when a professional, typically, or a parent, but most typically when a formal process decides that they want to request the views of the child. For our service, around 80% of the referrals we get are from the Additional Support Needs Tribunal or Education Appeals or local authorities, so from schools. So any situation where there is an education dispute ongoing and the people who are presiding over that dispute, if you will, want to find out what the child's views are, they can make a referral to us and they can sort of put forward specific questions that they would like us to explore with the child. So that's what the Children's View Service does. We receive a referral, we look at the questions, and then we go to the child and we try to find out what what the child feels about those questions that have been posed. It sounds very similar to independent advocacy, but it is not the same. In an independent advocacy situation, as Niki's going to talk to you about, the child is the one driving the car, the child is in control. It's the same with Iain. For those processes, the child needs to have capacity and need to be the one that sort of has a desire to put a case forward. For the Children's View Service, it's when adults want to find out what a child feels about an adult process. So the additional support needs tribunals we get involved in are typically the ones where parents have made a reference or a claim to the additional support needs tribunal. But we do also, as I said, see referrals from parents and carers and from teaching staff where there's a formal process ongoing in school. So that could be an exclusion, a formal exclusion, or an unlawful informal exclusion, which we see sometimes as well, where the school has excluded a child without any paperwork being carried out, which is not something we enjoy seeing because it should not happen. But in those cases, we can come in and we can ascertain the child's views on what happened as well. So the way we do that is we look at the questions, and then we move on to contact the people who know the child best. So that's the parents and carers for starters. And then we sometimes speak to school staff as well, if appropriate. Then we develop from scratch child-friendly communication tools that can include talking mats. It can include a social story letter to the child. And then we go out and we carry out our views gathering sessions. Sort of contrary to advocacy, which can last for many months, this is a short and sweet process. We typically have tight deadlines. We meet with the child 2 or 3 times, sometimes a bit more. We build rapport and we take the child's views. We write a report and the child then look at that report and we send it off when the child is happy with the contents. Sometimes that report is a physical report. Sometimes it's a Lego building, and recently we submitted a song. So it's whatever the child needs that report to be, and we take the child's lead very, very seriously in this. We always say the child is our boss. Mom and dad might be the child's boss, but the child is our boss in these cases. Next slide, please. You can just skip that one. Sorry. There we go. So I suppose I'm not going to go into too much detail about the different sort of types of reports we do, but we are slightly different again to Niki and Iain, because the children that come to ourselves typically have the capacity to instruct us. And where they do, then we would use sort of a mix of person-centered tools. We find that asking a child, how do you feel about school? Or how do you feel about your classroom? Can be too big, it can be too broad. But asking a child, can you identify 3 emojis on this table that sort of illustrates how you feel about school or about your classroom or about the corridors or about your teacher, can tell a story worth more than 1,000 words at times. We use talking mats, we use a lot of sort of guided mapping and mind mapping exercises, and we use sort of a host of more or less hilarious tools. Sometimes we come out of a session covered in glitter glue and paint, which is wonderful. Sometimes it's much more straightforward. But where children are able to instruct us directly, we use sort of a host of different tools to engage with the child. Next slide, please. So where we differ from the other parts of My Rights My Say is that sometimes we work with children who are not able or who do not have the capacity to instruct us directly, but they can do so indirectly or non-directed. So in these cases, we rely on things like intensive interaction and observations, and basically just spending time with children and young people, building a picture of who they are. And the purpose of this is to try to support those children to communicate their likes and dislikes and their preferences to us so we can share them with others. We also speak to parents and carers and school staff in these cases, and we use the Shanari indicators to build a picture of all the things we learn about the child. And then we don't make recommendations, we don't sort of carry out assessments. The only thing we do is gather information so we can share it with others, and we try to ask questions and get the decision makers to think about questions we think it's reasonable to assume the child would want answers to. So typically this would be children that didn't have full capacity to instruct, but we have also had My Rights My Say cases of children who were in so much distress that they could not instruct us. It was not a lack of capacity. It was a matter of well-being. A young person, for example, said, I want to share my views, but I don't want to have a conversation. Can you just come and spend some time with me in school and see what it's like for me? Can you just walk in my shoes? So that's what we do. Again, the child is in the driver's seat. So these are some of the different ways we engage with children. Our main goal is that it's meaningful and it feels safe for the child, and that the child is the one that feels this is being done with me, not sort of on top of me. So that's what guides us when we engage with children in the Children's Views service. Next slide, please. So I think the main thing that guides us, and this will be true for all the services in My Rights My Say, is that we are entirely objective. We don't have any sort of preconceived ideas of what should or shouldn't happen. We respect the way the child communicate. We listen to what the child tells us, and we believe what the child tells us. A child coming through My Rights May Say or coming through Children's Views will never hear from us, are you sure that's what happened? Or maybe it would be better if you said it like this, or you should just try. You know, we don't give advice. That's not what we're here for. Iain is the exception to that. I think maybe Iain, you will give some advice around legal processes that the rest of us won't. So we write down what the child tells us, and then we share the child's views with relevant stakeholders. I think about it as a bit of a funnel. We take all this information and we pass it on to people with as little interference from ourselves as possible. What we don't do is that we don't tell children what to say, we don't carry out these assessments, and we don't try to lead the child to say the right thing. We don't advocate for anyone else, so we don't take on board parents' views and alter the report we write for the child. It's about the child's views, whatever they may be. And interestingly, we don't act in the best interest of the child. And that is because we are not the ones making decisions, and children have a right to share their views in these formal adult-led education disputes. And we support them to do that. Whether that is what's right for the child or not, that's not for us to decide. So that is kind of how we leave that. So if you could take the next slide, please. So that was like a whistle-stop tour of the Children's Views service. I now have the honor. I feel like you're getting a lot of Marie tonight. I am sorry, but we don't have an Enquire colleague here today. And because Enquire are affiliated with Children in Scotland, which is my organization, I have the awesome task of also telling you a bit about Enquire. Some of you might have come across Enquire. It's the national helpline for advice and information on additional support for learning. I know that they did one of these sessions before, Diane. I think that's right. They are the most knowledgeable people on the planet, I think, and they're a really good port of call if you have questions about your child's rights or about your rights as a parent, about any process you might be considering, whether that is requesting a coordinated support plan, or whether it's about requesting additional support for your child or going down an appeal route. And they're really, really good to talk things over with. So they have phone number, they have a chat forum, and they have email addresses, etc. as well. They are very, very busy and oversubscribed, as you can imagine. So please bear with them. There can and will always be a bit of a wait, as much as they would like to be there and available to respond immediately. Sometimes it does take them a wee bit of time, but stick with it and they will get back to you. Enquire also administer the Reach website, which is a website for children and young people themselves around their rights if they have additional support needs, and what sort of different terminologies mean, etc. And it's a really good resource if your child is having a difficult time in school. It's a great way for your child to feel involved and get some support to understand what's happening around them. So I would highly recommend that as well. I think that is me, and I am going to hand you over to Niki, who will talk about independent advocacy, which is a massive and very, very important part of My Rights My Say. Thank you.
Hi, and thanks, Marie, very much. Yes, I coordinate the team of advocacy workers who deliver the My Rights My Say independent advocacy service across the whole of Scotland. Before I talk a bit more about how our service works, I thought I'd give you a bit of a brief description of what independent advocacy actually is. So it's a service that helps people to uphold their rights and supports them to have their voice heard in decisions being made with them and for them. And specifically from My Rights My Say, it's about decisions that are being made about how they're supported to access education. And make sure that the young person's voice is heard and that young person remains right at the centre of any decision-making process. It is free from conflict of interest. That's the independent part. It means that the advocacy worker is there for the person alone, and it ensures that their views and not those of any others are expressed. And while we recognise it's often the duty of people around young people to act on or make decisions in their best interests, a young person may have views which are in conflict with others. And because independent advocacy is free from conflict of interest, it can support a young person to have their views heard, even when it's difficult to do so in that context. Similarly to the way that Marie was describing her service, we don't give advice to any young person. We don't tell them what we think, and we don't tell them what we think they should say. Independent advocacy organisations follow the principles of independent advocacy set out by the SIAA. Partners in Advocacy is registered with SIA, and if you wanted more information about those principles, you can find information on our website or also on the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance website. Next slide, please. So we've heard a lot already from Marie and Iain about the rights of children under the My Rights, My Say service. And around some of the other pieces of legislation around children's rights in Scotland. So, as we heard, the amendments to the Additional Support for Learning Scotland Act effectively extended a number of rights to children and young people aged from 12 to 15 years, which were previously only held by people with age 16 or over. So these extended rights form the basis or the framework of the work that we do in the My Rights, My Say advocacy service. And from the very beginning of the partnership and all the way through it, advocacy workers will make children and young people aware of their rights and keep coming back to their rights as they navigate the process that they're in. So just having a closer look at those rights that are extended. So the children and young people have a right to ask their local authority to find out about their additional support needs. What are they? They can request a specific assessment, find out if they need a CSP, a coordinated support plan. Thankfully, Iain went into the details of CSPs because that's a topic in itself, but they can ask for a CSP to be reviewed, and an advocacy worker will regularly support children and young people to fill in the paperwork that's required to make those requests. Children and young people have a right to get that information or information to be shared with them when they have planning meetings, to have information about their additional support needs, results of assessments, receive copies of their planning processes, their CSP, and to be told about the decisions that are made around their rights. They must also be asked if they are happy at the end of the day for that information to be shared with other people when they're leaving school, when they're moving on from the school environment. Iain went into a lot of useful detail, but I'll just summarise again the right to be involved in resolving disagreements. So they can ask for independent adjudication, and with Iain's help and an advocacy worker's help to give the views to Iain, make a reference to the additional support need when they need a more formal resolution to a dispute. And they can be asked for their views during any mediation. The right to request mediation or make a placing request actually for school, it's not a right that is extended to children aged 12 to 15 under the My Rights, My Say provision. And that right does remain with parents, but they can absolutely be part of that process and have their views heard and taken into account. And of course, central to advocacy, the right to be heard, and to be supported, to have their views heard, to be involved in decisions about their support, and to have access to an advocacy worker is a core right of the My Rights, My Say process. Next slide, please. So what does advocacy look like for a young person? Well, it all starts with a referral. And that referral can be made to the My Rights, My Say advocacy service via a direct link. I should have highlighted that I had a link on a previous slide, sorry, to that referral form on our website. They can also follow an inquiry through the Enquire website. And those referrals can be made by anyone, can be made by professionals, they can be made by the child or young person themselves, which is always great when that happens, but most commonly referrals come to us from parents and carers who are concerned about a young person not having their additional support needs met. Sorry, I've lost my place. Yeah, an advocacy worker will connect once they've been allocated. An advocacy worker will connect with the family. They will arrange to connect with the young person in the way that that young person is comfortable with. So whether that might be face-to-face in the first instance, a video call, a phone call, text messages, whichever way the young person prefers. From that moment, they become the boss, as Marie had said. They call the shots, essentially, on how they want this whole thing to work. The advocacy worker starts by explaining all of the rights that I mentioned previously, making sure that the young person understands which ones they want to be supported to uphold. And if the young person is happy to progress with that, we ask the young person to sign something we call a mandate. And that's essentially just a letter to the Education Authority, which notifies them of their intention to use those rights and to have an advocacy worker to support them to do just that. So what happens after that is the variable part. The advocacy worker and the young person will meet together several times, most often, to identify the issues and the challenges that young person is facing and plan together how they want to address those going forward. So Marie already spoke about some of the ways that her team like to help young people to communicate their views, and our advocacy workers use the same imaginative alternative methods to get to know young people and to have their views represented. Our workers are incredibly flexible and patient and imaginative, and the children or the child or young person always takes the lead on what works best. An example at the moment, one of our advocacy partners uses voice notes. So when they if an issue arises at school, they've come out of a class or a meeting that's caused an issue, they record their voice note and they send it straight away to their advocacy worker. And so the feelings and the views about that particular issue are fresh, and the issues can be addressed very quickly together with the advocacy worker. An advocacy worker can attend meetings with or on behalf of a young person. They can submit views to school or directly to the local authority. As I said, they can work together with Iain if they're working towards a tribunal. There are many vagaries of what an advocacy partnership looks like, depending on the young person and depending on what their challenges are. And when those original issues or challenges are identified and explored, discussed, addressed by school, I don't say fixed because we can't promise to fix things just with advocacy support, but we do empower a young person to look for that resolution using their voice. Once they feel empowered to do that and enabled to be part of the ongoing planning process around their needs, the partnership likely closes unless a new issue has arisen. And re-referrals are always welcome, can always be made back to our service right up until a child's 16th birthday. Next slide, please. I think we're probably quite close on time, but I thought it might be useful to illustrate what advocacy looks like through I might briefly highlight a case study. So Charlie was 13 years old, he's autistic, and he hasn't been to school for several months, and his mum referred him to our advocacy service. Mum is going to meetings with school, but she feels that nothing's changing, and she feels that because school are not hearing Charlie's views from him directly, they're relayed by her, they are not being acted upon or taken seriously. But Charlie feels he can't attend those meetings because he finds them too overwhelming. So the advocacy worker met with Charlie, and he noted that that Charlie found it really difficult to even describe the challenges for him at school. So the advocacy worker set up several visits, calls, just getting to know Charlie better, each time chatting about his interests, doing fun stuff, unpressured, things like playing Uno and Dobble, which is, that's pretty standard fare for advocacy workers. We're expert at Uno. And with time, they just built up trust together using mind mapping, visual prompt cards, and the advocacy worker was able to gather Charlie's views for a meeting. And it was discovered that Charlie was finding transitions between classes in school really difficult, really triggering. Just sensory overload in that period where he was transferring from one class to another, and was becoming so distracted by anticipating that stress that he couldn't take meaningful part in class. And so the advocacy worker was able to describe that stress, that trigger at the meeting. And actually, Charlie was able to get out of class a bit earlier before the bell rang. So he was navigating corridors when they were quiet, moving on to the next class. And so something quite simple, but just reduced the stress around all of that and just allowed Charlie just to be more engaged in classes and in subjects. And actually, as the advocacy partnership moved on, that confidence that Charlie had, that his voice was heard, meant that he was actually able to share views himself with the advocacy worker supporting him at meetings. And actually, the partnership closed when Charlie was able to attend meetings himself and give over his own views. So a positive outcome for Charlie. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to labour this point because we have talked about legislation and frameworks, but just as a summary, I'd say it's important to remember that children in Scotland have rights when it comes to their education. We've all talked about the legislation tonight, which scaffolds that upholding of children's rights. And when things are difficult between you or your child in school, there are these frameworks which are set out, which you can expect your education authority to use to put in place additional support needs. The Enquire website, I will say, reiterate what Marie was saying, it's a mine of information on rights within education. Any further questions you might have could be answered very likely by looking at the Enquire website. You might have more questions about legislation specifically. Those can always be addressed by Iain, our legal eel, in the Q&A session, which is coming up shortly. I just want to say thank you. I'm going to pass back to Iain now just to wrap up.
Thanks very much, Niki. Yeah, so this is just a way to contact the various parts of My Rights My Say. So if you've got questions about that, then please do use those email addresses. Also, the website is there, and that's got a referral form and also more information about the service, and in particular is designed to be accessible by children and young people. So do take advantage of that. So I think that probably brings us on to the questions section now. And I don't know if, Dan, have you got some questions lined up for probably mostly Marie and Niki, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I do have some questions. So thank you so much to all three of you for that really helpful overview of what might look like the outset to be complex in terms of all the different organisations coming together, but it was really helpful for you to go through each of those ones and explain what you do. So we have got a couple of comments and questions. So if you do have any more, please feel free to put them in the chat just now while I start to share. I think the first one, I think I'm sure you'll be able to identify with, certainly here at Connect, we can identify with as well about the issue of challenges. So I think it was more a comment rather than a question, someone sharing their experiences. So more about the sort of, there's so many challenges in schools. Some of them is about resources and allocation of funds, comment about sort of funds being given to schools on the basis of numbers and not needs, and how can that be addressed, not enough resources, and so maybe some of the challenges about access and advocacy. And just I'll throw in one other little thing there, mentioned about being out the ream, the child being aged 16. So I suppose maybe something about what happens if your child is under 12 or over 16. And that might be a cheeky question since this is a 12 to 15 sort of specific organisation. But if you are able to even signpost to where parents could go when they can't come to your service, that might be helpful.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So where a child is under the age of 12, then they have the same rights, but the parent would be expected to be exercising those on that child's behalf. And parent, again, has a really broad definition. So, that would include, foster carers and aunts and uncles that the child stays with and things like that. So it's kind of a really broad brush on that. And for 16-year-olds, they would usually be exercising rights on their own, as well, or if they don't have capacity, it would be parents. In either of those cases, whether it's the young person or the parent, then the Scottish Government also fund our good friends at Govan Law Centre, who provide just the tribunal representation bit. So they don't do the advocacy and all of that, but the tribunal representation part of that is covered, and it's free, it's not means tested, and so on. And that project is called Let's Talk ASN. So you would be able to access that service as an alternative if your child is younger or older.
It might be worth also mentioning that if your child is under the age of 12 and you as a parent have made a reference or a claim to the Additional Support Needs Tribunal, Children in Scotland have an agreement with the tribunal that enables our Children's Views Service to work with children under the age of 12. That's not done as part of My Rights, My Say, and it's a spot purchase agreement we have with the tribunal, but any child who comes to a tribunal has a right to share their views with the Additional Support Needs Tribunal, and there is a provision for that. There is also sort of a scattered patchwork of independent advocacy organisations, some more reputable than others, I have to say, across Scotland. And Niki mentioned Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance before, which is a really good resource to look at whether in your area there is an advocacy support service in place. I wish it was a perfect blanket, like a thick, fat quilt that covers every child. It's not. There is plenty of lobbying going on, especially with the UNCRC, to try to change that. And I think, Diane, what you said there at first was some of the challenges around, I suppose we have beautiful legislation in Scotland, but sometimes we suffer from what's sort of popularly called implementation fatigue. You know, there's good legislation, but that doesn't always mean the parents and children are able to access the level of support that they need and that they have a right to, sort of in the eyes of the law, if you will. And that's a massive frustration and a massive weakness. And we do in Partners in Partners now, because in My Rights, My Say, we are there to try to lift things when it goes wrong. But as was said earlier, there are other processes in Scotland as well. Independent mediation should be available across all local authorities, which is a good non-judicial sort of road to try to resolve things in education if relationships are beginning to crack between home and school. So just sort of punting that as well. Sorry.
Just to make sure that people know that independent advocacy for the My Rights, My Say service is free, and it is right across Scotland. So any part of Scotland that a young person aged 12 to 15 is living, we can provide free advocacy service from 12 to 15.
Thank you for that. And I suppose just to clarify then, just so that it is clear for everybody. So because we mainly are supporting parents, so that's parents that would come to us. So if a parent is finding that their child has additional support needs, have tried to speak to the school about it and they're not getting anywhere, and it's difficult, and they suspect that the child feels the same or the child does feel the same. So in the first instance, if they've had that difficulty, have that conversation at school level, what would you suggest the first next step would be about where would they go next? Would it be stay within the local authority or come to an organisation like Enquire or the Advocacy or My Rights, My Say?
I mean, I often think that the sooner you get help to maintain those relationships, the better. And there's never any harm in reaching out to My Rights, My Say. There's never any harm in researching on Enquire's website, look for answers. So I would say it's a good start. Go on Enquire's website, look and try to see if we can find some answers. They'll always encourage conversation with schools first, but we also know that that can take you so far, and then you might reach a point where things can't be resolved. And we're always happy to have the conversation. And if it's not for us to support, then we will signpost and help find the right answers. I don't think there are any situations where we would say, no, just stick it out. And you know, if you feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall, don't keep hitting. It's absolutely fine to reach out and get some support and advice. I don't know, Niki, do you have anything else to add?
I was going to say exactly the same. I think possibly just add that the Partners in Advocacy website has a specific My Rights, My Say resource pool where advocacy workers are describing their role, where young people themselves are describing some of the challenges that they're facing and how advocacy has helped. So if your young person is in any doubt or has some questions about what advocacy might look like, it's a really great place to go and find just some information as well. So yeah, Enquire, My Rights My Say website and Partners in Advocacy website are all really good sources of information.
Brilliant, thank you. When one of you were presenting, someone had put in the chat, is this something that's available all across Scotland? I think they had some difficulties with their signal and audio, so just to clarify.
We're all over the shop. We also put boots on the ground if that's required. So we have worked, the Children's View Service has been in every single local authority, including Shetland, Orkney, Western Isles, everywhere. So we don't shy away from a little bit of travel. So yeah, we're across Scotland. Yeah, and we do a lot of online engagement as well across the different services, which is something we find children and young people sometimes prefer, or voice messages or text messages, or have a views gathering session while we play Minecraft. I mean, we're quite happy to be, as Niki said, entirely flexible and leave it up to the child. So yeah, every part of Scotland is covered.
Brilliant, thank you. And then it looks like the last question just now, although I might squeeze one in if there's enough time. So this is a question that's about CMIS and funding. So if a child is recorded as disabled on CMIS, and they don't have any support interventions or adaptations for learning, how will the school be receiving additional funding based on so is there a link between how you're recorded on CMIS and funding and getting support?
I'm going to sort of look towards Iain in desperation for this one, Iain.
I'm not sure about the answer to that. I wouldn't want to mislead.
No, I think is the answer to that question. So there's not. I think this is something that happens to an extent down south, that there's like a budget that follows the child, kind of idea, and that isn't something that's a feature of Scottish education. So the school will receive sort of delegated budget from the local authority, and actually different local authorities do it in different ways. There's usually some kind of formula that might then take into account levels of SAMD levels within the area that the school serves and things like that. The good news, I suppose, is that although the cost of supports is something that schools, education authorities can take into account, the system we have here is that all public schools in Scotland are managed by one of 32 education authorities. So when we're thinking about how much something costs, and we're thinking about the budget that might be available for that, or the resources that might be available to meet that, then you're not just looking at the school's budget. So it is the education authority as a whole who hold these rights and who are the duty bearers, as we would say in UNCRC speak. So it's the children who are that hold the rights, and the education authority are the duty bearers there. So the budget of the school is very rarely the determining factor in relation to that. And then the other thing to say, I suppose, in relation to that is that I would say that there's at least as many cases that we deal with, if not the majority of them, where the thing that is needed to be changed isn't actually something that costs any money or very much money. It can as often be about the way things are being done, or just taking the child's views seriously, then feeling that they've been properly heard and understood, and so on. So there's a lot you can do even in circumstances where there is a restricted budget, and that budget has to be seen in that kind of broader context as well.
Thank you so much. I don't think I'll squeeze my last question in because I want to say a proper thank you and goodbye to everybody. But I suppose one of the things I was thinking about was parent groups who we work a lot with, parent groups across Scotland, and perhaps some things for parent groups to think about in relation to like raising awareness of inclusion and additional support needs within the school community, both for children and families. We do have some information on our digital platform, MyConnect, for any parent groups who are thinking about that. And perhaps this is, you know, a conversation for us here at Connect to have with parent groups moving forwards. But I think with 2 minutes to 9 to go, I think I'll just, if there's no other questions there, I'll just draw a line for that tonight. And just to say again, a huge thank you so much to Iain Nisbet, Niki Chalmers and Marie Harrison for coming along this evening to join us, and all the people who've registered for this session this evening. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge, your expertise, signposting all those websites. And lots of people are saying thank you in the chat, so that's a really good sign. We have got the evaluation form for everybody to fill in, the QR code that I showed you, there it's there again. So we would love that feedback if you've got time. We'll take these comments as feedback as well, but if you want to add in a few additional words of feedback, and we will also share that feedback with My Rights My Say. But just to say thank you for the great questions in the chat and for coming along. You can use the feedback form to you know, suggest future sessions or partnerships that we could do with My Rights My Say, or perhaps anybody else. So yeah, I think that's it. I think it's just to say thank you so much again for your time, your expertise, answering the questions, and I hope to see you all soon. We do have another information session coming up in the start of June with Police Scotland, just to put that out there to everybody. Another really important topic to do with online safety, so I'm just advertising that just now. But yeah, I think just to say thank you so much everybody, and good evening.
You. Bye bye.